The morning at the small-town diner began like so many others, but there was something different in the air, a kind of quiet stillness that made the place feel softer than usual. The sun had just risen, so the golden light coming through the windows made the tables shine gently, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the room. It was the kind of morning when everything seemed calm, slow, peaceful. The kind that made people feel safe. The young waitress had started her shift only 10 minutes earlier. She had been working at the diner for almost a year, and she had grown used to how mornings felt here. The same regular customers, the same greetings, the same little routines that made the place familiar. But she liked it. She liked the sound of plates clinking behind the counter, the quiet chatter of early customers, and the feeling that she was helping start someone's day with at least a small bit of comfort. She wiped down a table near the window and glanced toward the entrance, expecting one of the usual customers. Instead, the bell above the door chimed softly, and she saw a man walk in with a young boy trailing behind him. They were strangers, and in a town this small, strangers always stood out. The man walked with hurried steps, his hand resting firmly on the boy's shoulder, as if pushing him forward. The boy looked around nervously, his eyes darting across the room like he was searching for something familiar and finding nothing. He was small, maybe 9 or 10, holding onto the edge of his jacket with one hand, as though it helped him feel safer. Something about him made the waitress pause. She couldn't explain why. It wasn't the way he walked or the way he looked. It was something quieter than that, something she could feel rather than see. His shoulders were pulled in tightly, and even though he tried to seem calm, there was a kind of quiet sadness in his eyes. The waitress greeted them with her usual warm smile, the same one she gave to every customer. "Good morning," she said softly. "You can sit anywhere you like." The man didn't return the smile. Instead, he nodded quickly, steering the boy to a booth near the corner. The boy slid into his seat carefully, as if trying not to make any noise. His gaze stayed down, fixed on the table. The waitress picked up 2 menus and walked over to them. She set one in front of the boy and one in front of the man. "I'll be right back with some water," she said. The man gave a short reply, barely looking at her. The boy didn't speak at all. He didn't even lift the menu dot as she filled 2 glasses of water at the counter. The waitress glanced over in their direction. The man was speaking, and though she couldn't hear his words, she could see the boy shrinking back slightly. It wasn't dramatic, just a small, tense movement, almost like a flinch he was trying to hide. She felt a strange tug in her chest. There were times in life when a person needed to mind their own business. She knew that. But there were also times when something felt wrong, even if there was no clear evidence. This was one of those moments, but she didn't want to assume anything too quickly. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that maybe the boy was just shy or tired. When she returned with the water, she placed the glasses down gently. "Do you need a few minutes to decide what to order?" she asked. The man didn't wait for the boy to answer. "I'll have eggs and toast," he said, already turning away. Then he looked sharply at the boy. "Tell her what you want." The boy swallowed hard, his hands tightening around the edge of the table. He didn't lift his eyes. "He'll have pancakes," the man said quickly, before the boy made a sound. The waitress nodded, writing it down. She noticed the boy's fingers were trembling slightly. Not enough for most people to notice, perhaps, but it was clear as day to her. Something inside her stirred again, that quiet feeling that something wasn't right. She offered the boy a gentle smile, hoping it might ease whatever was worrying him. "I'll get those started for you," she said softly. He gave the smallest nod, but still didn't lift his gaze. Back behind the counter, she grabbed the order slip and handed it to the cook. As he started preparing the food, she leaned against the counter for a moment, letting her eyes drift toward the corner booth again. The man was on his phone now, tapping rapidly. The boy sat still, too still, like someone trying not to draw attention. Every time the man looked up, the boy stiffened, like he was waiting for something he didn't want to happen. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, and there was nothing obviously alarming. But the silence between them felt heavy, and the waitress couldn't shake the uneasy feeling spreading in her chest. She tried not to jump to conclusions. After all, she didn't know them. She didn't know their story. Maybe the boy wasn't feeling well. Maybe he was simply scared of being somewhere unfamiliar. There were so many harmless explanations, but she had been around people long enough to know when someone was scared. Not nervous scared. When the food was ready, she carried the plates over. The man grabbed his fork immediately. The boy stared at his pancakes, but didn't move to eat. It wasn't until the man looked at him with a sharp expression that he picked up his fork slowly and took a small bite. The waitress noticed something else then. The boy's sleeve had slipped up a bit, revealing a small bruise near his wrist. It wasn't large, but it was enough. Enough to make her heart sink, yet she didn't react outwardly. She kept her face calm, steady, neutral. She knew better than to show anything that might draw attention. She stepped away and pretended to clean a nearby table. But her mind was racing in quiet, careful circles. She didn't want to assume the worst. She didn't want to make a mistake. But she also couldn't ignore the growing worry inside her. She stole one more glance at the boy. He took another slow bite of pancake, his hands trembling again. He didn't look around the diner at all, not even once. Most kids his age would be curious, distracted, interested in their surroundings. But he seemed locked inside himself, like he was thinking of something far away or trying to stay very small. She looked down, her hands tightening slightly on the cloth she was holding. Something wasn't right. She could feel it deep inside, a quiet truth she wished she could dismiss, but COULDN single quotes T dot. She thought about the many stories she had heard over the years, stories people only shared once they felt safe. Stories about the things they had gone through silently because they didn't know who to trust. Maybe the boy was fine. Maybe she was overthinking all of this. Maybe the bruise had come from play or sports. Maybe he was simply a shy child, but maybe he wasn't. She breathed slowly, grounding herself. Rushing into conclusions wouldn't help, but neither would ignoring her instincts. As she walked back toward the counter, she caught a brief glimpse of the boy, lifting his eyes. For the first time since walking in, he looked directly at her. It wasn't long, just a second or two, but it was enough. There was something in his eyes. Not a plea, not a message, not anything spoken, but something quiet, something heavy. Something that made her stop in her tracks for half a heartbeat. Fear. She looked away quickly so the man wouldn't notice. Her heart thudded once, hard. Something was wrong. She knew it now. The question was what she should do about it. She returned to wiping down the counter, trying to look relaxed. She glanced back at the boy once more, but he was staring at his plate, shoulders tight again. The morning outside looked calm, peaceful, steady. But inside the diner, the air felt different now. Thicker, tense. And the waitress knew this was not going to be an ordinary morning after all. The morning rush had settled into a quiet hum, but the waitress felt anything but calm. She tried to focus on her usual tasks, refilling sugar jars, checking coffee pots, wiping down counters, but her mind kept drifting back to the boy in the corner booth. Something about him had pulled at her heart the moment he walked in, and now that feeling was stronger than ever. She glanced over again from behind the counter. The man kept checking his phone, tapping the screen like he was annoyed by every second that passed. The boy, meanwhile, sat stiff and small, taking slow bites of his pancakes. He didn't seem hungry. He looked like he was eating only because he had to. There was a heaviness around him, a quiet sadness that didn't belong on a child's face. The waitress wondered if she should say something, maybe ask the boy if he was all right, or ask the man if everything was okay, but she held back. She didn't want to make things worse. She didn't want to embarrass them or make the man angry. But she couldn't shake the feeling building in her chest. She stepped away from the counter and pretended to sweep near the jukebox, giving herself an excuse to stay within view of the booth. Every few seconds she glanced up, just long enough to check on the boy. That was when she saw him rubbing his wrist under the table, the same wrist where the small bruise had been earlier. His movements were slow and careful, like he didn't want anyone to notice. She felt her throat tighten. He shouldn't have looked that scared. Children should be carefree at a diner, excited about pancakes and syrup, pointing out the pictures on the wall, or asking for extra whipped cream. This boy was none of that. He looked like he was somewhere far away, trapped in thoughts he didn't want. She took another deep breath. Maybe she was imagining things. Maybe she was worrying too much. But no, her instincts weren't wrong. Not this time. She moved closer again, lightly adjusting chairs along the aisle. When she reached the booth behind the boy, she noticed something she hadn't seen earlier. His shirt collar was slightly uneven, and when he shifted, she saw a faint mark near the side of his neck. She froze for a second, her breath catching. It was small, barely noticeable, but it made her stomach twist. She pretended to adjust the napkin holder on the empty table and then slowly backed away. Her hands shook just a little. She pressed them against her apron, trying to steady herself. She had seen signs like this before. Not often, but enough to recognize them. And now her heart was pounding. As she returned behind the counter, the cook looked at her with a raised eyebrow. "You all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded quickly. "Yeah, just a long morning." But it wasn't the morning. It was the boy. It was the strange tension between him and the man. It was the way every instinct in her body felt alert, like something deep inside her was telling her to stay aware. She looked over again. The man pushed his empty plate aside and checked his watch, appearing impatient. He muttered something to the boy, who sat up straighter instantly, as if startled. The waitress felt a chill run through her. The boy didn't speak. Not once. Not a single word since he walked in. That alone said enough. Customers came and went, the bell over the door ringing lightly each time, but the waitress hardly noticed them now. Her attention stayed on the boy. She watched carefully, studying the small details no one else seemed to see. He didn't fidget. He didn't look around. He didn't act like a child in a diner. He acted like someone afraid of making a mistake. She suddenly remembered something an older woman had once told her. Someone who'd been a mentor when she was younger. Sometimes people ask for help without saying a word. You just have to listen with more than your ears. The waitress understood that now. The boy wasn't speaking, but he was saying something all the same. She brushed her hands against the edge of the counter and forced herself to stay calm. She needed a moment to think, to figure out if she was overreacting or if something truly dangerous was happening. She stepped into the small hallway near the staff area, pretending to check the supply shelf. She let the quiet of the space settle around her. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe. Her heart was beating fast. She thought about her own childhood, about the people who had helped her when she needed it. She thought about times she had been scared, and how one person's kindness had made all the difference. She couldn't walk away from this. Not now. When she returned to the main room, she found the man standing up, pulling his jacket on. The boy stood up too, moving quickly to follow. The waitress felt her pulse spike. It was too soon. She hadn't figured out what to do yet. She walked over casually with a soft smile, careful not to reveal her worry. "Is everything all right?" she asked politely. "We're leaving," the man said shortly. "Where's the check?" She held onto her calm expression, even as her stomach tightened. I'll print it for you. Be just a moment." She went behind the counter and pressed the buttons on the register slowly, too slowly on purpose. Her mind raced as she waited for the receipt to print. She glanced up at the booth. Again, the man was tapping his foot impatiently. The boy stood silently behind him, holding on to the strap of his bag. His eyes stared at the floor. The waitress swallowed. She wasn't ready to let them walk out. Not until she understood what was happening. But she also knew she couldn't accuse anyone of anything, as she couldn't make the man suspicious. So she stayed calm. She let the machine print slower than it needed to. She let seconds pass like drops of water. When she returned with the receipt, she placed it on the table and forced a small smile. "Take your time," she said. The man glanced at it, sighed loudly, and reached into his pocket. "We don't have time," he muttered. The girl felt her heartbeat speeding up again. She stepped back toward the counter, but before she reached it, something stopped her. A soft movement. A tiny sound. The kind of sound that meant nothing in a normal moment, but in this moment, it meant everything. The waitress turned her head just in time to see the boy lift his eyes again, only this time, he wasn't looking at the door or the man. He was looking at her, and he looked scared. His eyes were wide, shining with a quiet fear that made her breath catch. It was a quick glance, barely more than a heartbeat. But it held so much weight that it almost felt like a message. It was as if he was silently asking her something, asking for safety, for help, for someone to notice. She stood frozen. For a second as the boy looked down again quickly, like he regretted looking up at all. Her chest tightened. Her instincts were screaming, now not in panic, but in clarity. She had to trust herself. She had to trust that quiet feeling inside her. As the man reached into his wallet. The waitress stepped behind the counter again. But this time she wasn't wiping surfaces or grabbing menus. She leaned slightly to the side, just enough to see the boy's face once more. He wasn't looking up anymore. He had gone back to being small, quiet, hidden. The waitress felt something shift inside her. Something firm, something certain. Someone needed to help this boy, and she knew she might be the only person who could, but she couldn't make a mistake. She needed to stay calm and pay close attention. She needed to understand what the boy was trying to say. Without speaking. The man placed money on the table and moved toward the door. The boy followed closely, his steps quiet. The waitress watched them walk. Every step felt like time slipping away. Just before they reached the exit, the boy hesitated for the smallest moments, so small that the man didn't seem to notice, but she noticed. When he paused, he turned his head slightly, as if checking whether she was still watching. She was. Their eyes met again. And this time the look wasn't just fear, but it was something else, something like a silent plea. She felt her, heart clenched. The boy wasn't just scared. He was asking for help, without words, without gestures. But it was clear. The man pushed the door open, and the boy stepped out into the bright morning light. The door closed softly behind them, the bell above it chiming lightly. The waitress stood still, her breath trembling. This wasn't her imagination. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Something was terribly wrong. And she knew deep in her heart that she couldn't just let them walk away. Not yet. Not until she understood what was happening. Not until she knew the boy was safe. The door had barely closed behind the man, and the boy, when the waitress felt her whole body react in a way she couldn't ignore. It was like her heart dropped into her stomach, leaving a tight, uneasy feeling that spread through her chest. She stood there for a moment, frozen, staring at the glass door, as if she could somehow see through it and make sure the boy was all right. But she couldn't see him. They were gone from her view, swallowed by the bright morning outside. Her mind was racing. Every instinct she had was telling her that something wasn't right. That boy didn't look like someone who simply felt shy or tired. He looked like someone carrying a quiet fear, one he didn't dare speak out loud. And the man with him, every part of his behavior felt wrong. The impatience, the way he interrupted the boy, the way the boy flinched at his movements. She felt a tremor travel through her hands. She pressed them against the edge of the counter, trying to ground herself. Should she follow them outside? That idea flashed across her mind, but she stopped it immediately. She couldn't just run after them. She didn't know who they were, or what the situation was. She needed to stay calm. She needed to think. The bell above the door rang softly as another customer walked in, but she barely heard it. She stepped back slightly, pretending to sort receipts so no one would notice the worry on her face. She thought of the boy again, his quiet eyes. The little hesitation before leaving, that moment when he looked at her as if he desperately wanted her to understand something. She had seen people communicate fear in many different ways. But that look was different. It was like a whisper without sound. She took a slow breath and then forced another. Her heart was still heavy, but now there was something else. Determination. She stepped into the back area for a moment, leaning against the staff door. She could hear the soft clatter of dishes and the cook mumbling something from the kitchen. But her focus stayed on one thought. She needed to figure out what the boy was trying to tell her. She closed her eyes and replayed every detail. The trembling hands, the bruise on his wrist, the way he wouldn't speak, the way he flinched when the man raised his voice, the fear in his eyes. None of it was normal. And then she remembered something she hadn't fully processed earlier, something small but important. When she brought them the water earlier, the boy had tried to lift his menu. At the time, she didn't pay attention, but now she remembered seeing the edge of a napkin peeking out. Had he been trying to write something? Trying to signal her even then? The memory hit her like a soft shock. She stepped out from the back room quickly and hurried toward the booth where they had been sitting. The table was empty now, except for the 2 glasses of water and a couple of syrup drops near the boy's plate. And there, half tucked under the edge of the napkin holder, she saw something. Her breath caught. It was a small piece of paper folded twice, its corner sticking out just enough for her to notice. Her fingers moved carefully as she pulled it free. Oh, napkin. Her heart thudded once, loud and heavy. She unfolded it slowly, afraid of what she might find, but at the same time, desperately needing to know. The napkin opened fully in her hands. And there, written in shaky, uneven letters, was a message. Just 2 words. Help me. Her breath stopped. Her body froze. The words were small, faint, like they were written by someone scared to be seen. But they were enough to send a wave of shock rushing through her. The boy had reached out. The boy had asked for help, silently, carefully, fearfully. But he had asked. Her hands trembled around the napkin, and she felt her eyes sting. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. This wasn't her imagination. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a child reaching out in the only way he felt safe. She closed the napkin gently, holding it like something fragile. Her heart was pounding so hard, she could feel it in her throat. She needed to act. Now, the fear she had felt earlier was replaced by a surge of courage she didn't expect. A strength that came from the thought of that boy, so quiet, so scared, so desperate for someone to notice. She hurried toward the manager's office, knocking softly before pushing the door open. Inside, the manager was doing paperwork, sipping from a large mug of coffee. He looked up when she entered. Everything all right? You look pale. She stepped closer, holding the napkin in her hand. Something's wrong. I think a boy was asking for help. The manager set his mug down slowly. What do you mean? She handed him the napkin. He read the words, and his eyes widened. Did he give this to you? He left it. I didn't see it right away, but I know he meant it. Her voice shook, but she kept speaking. He looked scared, really scared. The man he was with. Something felt wrong. The manager took a deep breath, rubbing his forehead. Do you think we should call someone? Yes, she said, without hesitation. We have to. He reached out for help. The manager nodded slowly. All right, let's do it. He picked up the phone and dialed emergency services. The waitress stood nearby, her hands clasped tightly together, listening to the soft ring from the speaker. When the operator answered, the manager explained everything calmly and clearly. The boy, the napkin, the man's behavior, the fear she had seen in the boy's eyes. The operator listened and then asked for descriptions. The waitress stepped forward, speaking softly but firmly. She described the boy, his size, his hair, his clothes. The bruise she had seen. Then she described the man, his height, his jacket. The impatient way he spoke. The operator told them police. Units were already in the area and would be there soon. When the call ended, the waitress felt a new wave of emotion rise inside her, part fear, part hope. She stepped out of the office and walked back into the main diner. Scanning the street outside through the wide windows, she hoped they hadn't gone far. She hoped they were still in this part of town. She hoped they were safe. Minutes passed, though they felt much longer. Each second stretched, heavy with worry. The waitress wiped her hands on her apron, shifting her weight back and forth. She kept glancing at the napkin in her hand, as if reminding herself it was real. Other customers came in, and she greeted them with forced smiles, doing her best to not let her fear show. She took orders, refilled drinks, but her heart wasn't in it. Her mind stayed on the boy. Then the sound of a police radio came from outside. She turned quickly. 2 officers walked in, their expressions serious but calm. One of them stepped toward the counter. Are you the one who found the note? She nodded. Yes, I saw the boy earlier. He looked really scared. We need every detail you can remember, the officer said gently. She took a deep breath and told them everything: how the boy acted, how the man acted, the trembling hands, the bruise, the silence, the looks. As she spoke, the officers exchanged glances, their expressions tightening slightly. You're sure he wrote this? One of them asked, nodding toward the napkin. Yes, she said without hesitation. He looked at me before he left, like he wanted me to see it. The officer nodded. You did the right thing. You may have helped someone who really needed it. His words comforted her a little, but she still felt anxious. Will you find him? She asked. We're going to try, the officer said. We have patrols searching the area right now, and we'll check nearby cameras. She nodded slowly, gripping the napkin again. The officers thanked her and stepped outside to continue the search. She walked to the window, her thoughts heavy, her eyes following them until they disappeared from view. The diner felt strange, now too quiet, even with customers speaking softly and dishes clinking. The air felt tense, like everyone could sense something important had just happened. The waitress looked down at her hands. They were still shaking. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if the police would find the boy, or if he was somewhere safe. But she knew one thing for certain. He had reached out to her, and she had answered. She hoped more than anything that it would be enough. As she walked back toward the counter, she took a deep breath, steadying herself. She couldn't change the past. She couldn't erase the fear she had seen, but she could hold on to the hope that the boy would soon be safe. And that hope, small as it was, gave her the strength to keep going, even if the morning had started like any other. She knew now that nothing about this day was ordinary. It was a moment she would remember forever, A moment when a child reached out silently and she chose to listen. The moment the quiet boy was taken out of the diner, the whole place felt different. It was as if someone had turned down the noise in the room, leaving only a heavy silence behind. The waitress stood near the counter, trying to steady her breathing. Even though she had done the right thing, her hands still trembled a little. She kept thinking about the boy's eyes, those silent, desperate eyes that told a story. He couldn't speak out loud. She stepped to the side and tried to clear the table she had been working on before everything happened. Her coworker, who had watched the whole moment unravel, went over to her and whispered softly. She didn't ask too many questions, but she wanted to make sure her friend was all right. The waitress nodded, even though she still felt that uneasy feeling sitting in her chest. She tried to shake it off and return to the normal rhythm of work. But nothing felt normal anymore. Some customers had seen what happened. A few of them kept glancing at the door every few minutes, as if expecting someone to walk back in and explain everything. Others acted like nothing at all had happened and went right back to their meals. But the waitress felt every second pass like a wait. She kept wondering what the boy might be going through. She wished she could have asked more questions or done more, but she also knew that calling for help was the only thing she could do at that moment. It wasn't her place to investigate or push him with questions. She just had to trust that the right people were now involved. About 20 minutes later, her manager stepped out from the back office. He had gotten a call from the emergency team that had picked up the boy. He didn't give many details, but he did tell her that she had done the right thing by calling. Hearing it helped her breathe a little easier. But she still felt that lingering concern inside her as she returned to her tasks. She noticed something on the floor, a small bracelet. It looked like the kind children often wear, simple beads on an elastic string. She bent down to pick it up and realized it must have belonged to the boy. She held it gently in her palm. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at it. It made everything feel even more real. She placed the bracelet in a small paper bag and kept it safely near the counter, hoping someone would come looking for it. Maybe someone from the emergency team would return. Or maybe the boy himself might someday ask for it. She didn't know, but she wanted to make sure it was kept safe. The rest of her shift felt slow, even though she was constantly moving. She tried to give her full attention to each customer, but her mind kept drifting back to that one short moment when the boy looked up at her with fear, as if asking for help without saying a word. She had seen many things while working in a busy diner, but this was different. This felt personal, even though she didn't know him. When her shift was finally over, she walked home quietly. The city lights reflected on the wet pavement, and the night air felt heavier than usual. She kept replaying the scene in her mind, hoping she hadn't misread anything. But every time she remembered his expression, she knew she hadn't imagined it. Something had been wrong, very wrong. She reached her small apartment, hung her apron on the hook by the door, and sat down on her couch without even turning on the lights. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and let out a long breath. She wanted to push the thoughts aside, but her heart wouldn't let her. She wondered if he was safe now. She wondered if someone had talked to him gently and made him feel protected. And she wondered if she would ever learn what had truly happened. The next morning, she woke earlier than usual, even though she had stayed up late thinking. She got ready for work with a quiet sense of determination. But when she stepped outside, she felt a strange nervousness settle in her stomach. She tried to ignore it as she walked toward the diner. As soon as she entered the diner, her manager waved her over. He looked serious, but not upset. He gestured for her to sit down for a moment. She had no idea what he was going to say, but she feared the worst. Maybe she had broken some rule. Maybe she had caused trouble. But as he spoke, she realized it wasn't bad news at all, that he told her someone from the emergency team had called back early in the morning. They wanted to speak with her. She felt her breath catch for a moment. The manager didn't know the details, only that they had more questions and wanted to thank her for acting quickly. Hearing that made her heart flutter with relief, but also curiosity. Questions? Why? What exactly had they learned? She wiped her palms on her apron and asked if she needed to go somewhere or wait for another call. The manager told her that one of the officers might stop by the diner later in the day. All morning she tried to carry on as usual, but her stomach stayed tense. She felt distracted. Every time the doorbell above the diner door chimed, she looked over hoping or maybe fearing that it was the officer. Finally, around noon, the bell rang and someone in uniform stepped inside. The waitress froze for a second before taking a slow breath and walking toward him. He introduced himself kindly, and she could feel that he wasn't there to accuse or blame her. He simply wanted to talk. They sat at a small corner booth, away from the bustle of customers. The officer thanked her again for noticing the boy's distress. Then he explained that the child was safe now. He didn't go into unnecessary detail, but he did say that her call had made a real difference. Without her noticing the signs and stepping forward, the situation might have taken a very different turn. She listened carefully, nodding softly. A bit of the weight that had been pressing on her chest finally began to lift. Then the officer mentioned that the boy had asked about something, a bracelet. The waitress immediately felt a spark of recognition. She told him she had found it and that she still had it behind the counter. She stood up and went to retrieve the small paper bag, bringing it back to the booth. The officer opened the bag gently and looked at the bracelet. A small smile crossed his face. He said the boy had been looking for it, explaining that it meant more to him than most people would ever guess. The officer didn't say why, but he didn't need to. The waitress could tell it was something deeply important. She felt a soft warmth in her chest, knowing she would be able to return it. But that wasn't all. The officer explained that the boy had said something quietly about her, about how he had noticed her kind eyes the moment she walked over to the table. He had felt like she was someone who wouldn't ignore him. That made her heart swell with emotion. She hadn't done anything grand or heroic. She had simply paid attention. She had simply cared. The officer told her that if she wanted, she might be able to see the boy soon to give him the bracelet personally. But it would depend on how he was feeling and what the professionals decided. The waitress nodded, unsure how to feel. Part of her wanted to see him and make sure he was okay. Another part worried about stepping into something she might not fully understand. Still, she agreed to stay available. The officer thanked her again and stood to leave. Before he stepped out, he paused and told her something that she would remember for a long time, that sometimes the people who make the biggest difference are the ones who pay attention when others don't. The rest of her day passed quietly, but her heart felt lighter than it had the night before. She continued working, moving through her tasks with more ease. But her thoughts kept returning to the bracelet, the boy, and the strange twist of events that had unfolded in just a single day dot as evening approached. She stepped outside for a short break. She sat on the small bench near the entrance of the diner and let the warm sun brush against her face. She wondered what tomorrow might bring. She wondered if she would see the boy again, or if this chapter would quietly close on its own. But deep inside, she had a feeling that the story wasn't over yet. She just didn't know what turn it would take next. The next few days felt strangely quiet for the waitress, even though the diner was as busy as ever. She kept moving from table to table, taking orders, pouring coffee, bringing out plates, and doing all the little things she had done so many times before. But her mind was often far away. She kept thinking about the boy and the way his eyes looked when he silently asked for help. She wondered where he was now, how he was doing, and whether he felt safe. The bracelet's return had meant something to him, That much she knew. But what she didn't know was whether her part in all of this was finished or just beginning. Late in the afternoon, as she was refilling salt shakers, her manager walked over and quietly said someone wanted to see her. She looked up quickly, her heart giving a small jump. For a moment, she wondered if it might be the boy. But then she realized it probably wasn't possible, not yet. When she stepped toward the front of the diner, she saw the same officer who had visited her a few days earlier. He gave her a warm nod, and she immediately sensed that this visit wasn't about trouble or questions. There was something calmer in his expression. He asked if she had a moment, and the manager quickly allowed her to step outside with him. They stood near the sidewalk where the afternoon sun was beginning to soften. The officer told her that the boy had been asking about her again, not out of fear, but out of comfort. He said the boy wanted to see her, but only if she felt okay with it. The professionals working with him believed it might help him feel grounded, since she was the first person he reached out to. The waitress felt a gentle rush of emotion move through her. She didn't know the boy, and she wasn't family, but somehow she had become someone important in this moment of his life. She nodded quietly and said she would like to see him. If she was allowed, the officer explained that she could visit him at a safe building nearby where trained people were helping him. It wasn't a hospital, just a place where children could rest and feel secure. He gave her the address and told her she could come the next day. The rest of the evening felt slow and heavy, but in a warm way. She kept looking at the small slip of paper with the address written on it. She tucked it into her pocket several times, checking to make sure it hadn't slipped away. When her shift finally ended, she walked home with a quiet sense of anticipation. Her steps were steady, but her heart felt full. She didn't know what she would say to him, and she didn't know what he would want to talk about, if anything at all. But she knew she would show up. That much was certain. That night, she found herself cleaning her small apartment without really thinking about it. She dusted off shelves she normally ignored, wiped the kitchen counter twice, and rearranged a stack of books on her table. Her mind was busy, even though her actions were simple. She wanted everything to be calm and clear before she faced the next day. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of distant traffic passing by. She replayed her memory of the boy, his quiet voice, his small hands, the tension in his shoulders, the fear he carried even when he tried to hide it. She wished she could take that feeling away from him, even though she knew she couldn't fix everything. When morning came, she woke early without needing her alarm. She made a simple breakfast, tied her hair back, and put on clothes that felt comfortable, not too formal, not too casual. She wanted to look gentle, not like someone arriving to ask questions. As she walked across the city, she noticed how the morning light made everything seem softer. People moved around her, walking dogs, sitting at bus stops, talking quietly. But for her, the world felt slower, like she was moving towards something important. When she reached the building, she paused for a moment outside the door. It wasn't big or fancy. It looked more like a community center. She stepped inside and was greeted by a kind woman at the front desk who already knew her name. The woman led her down a short hallway and explained that the boy was doing better today, though still a little quiet. He had asked about the waitress, but no one pressured him. Everything was gentle and at his pace. They reached a small room with soft lighting and a few chairs arranged in a circle. There were toys in one corner and a small table with drawing supplies. The woman told her to wait a moment. The waitress felt her heart beating faster as she stood there. She didn't know what he would look like today, whether he would seem calm or frightened, whether he would speak at all. Then the door opened softly. The boy stepped inside, holding the bracelet she had given back to him. His eyes, which had once been filled with so much fear, looked softer now. Still guarded, but softer. He saw her standing there and took a small step forward. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She didn't want to overwhelm him, and he seemed unsure how to begin. "You found it," he said quietly, touching the bracelet. She nodded. "I wanted to make sure it got back to you." He looked down at it, gently rolling it between his fingers. "Thank you." They sat down on 2 chairs facing each other, not too close, not too far. A staff member stayed in the room, sitting quietly in the corner to make sure everything stayed comfortable. The boy didn't say much at first. He played with a small toy car on the table. The waitress didn't rush him. She simply sat with her hands resting calmly in her lap, giving him the space to speak if he wanted. After a few quiet minutes, he looked up at her. "You were nice," he whispered. She smiled softly. "I just wanted to help." He nodded a little, then hesitated before speaking again. "I didn't know what to do." "But you saw me." His words made her eyes sting for a moment. She blinked quickly, not wanting to make the moment heavy or emotional for him. "You did the brave part," she replied gently. "You reached out. You trusted someone." He looked at her with a shy expression, one that carried both relief and uncertainty. They talked a little. Not about anything painful, just small, simple things. He told her about how he liked drawing cars and animals. She told him about the diner and how she always tried to make people smile when they came in hungry or tired. Whenever he paused, she didn't push. She let him guide the conversation. After a while, he asked something unexpected. "Will you come again?" The question felt like a soft arrow straight to her heart. She nodded without hesitation. "If you want me to, I'll come." He gave a small, almost invisible smile. The staff member in the room also seemed quietly relieved. The boy had been opening up slowly, but this moment was something special, something gentle. Their time together ended softly. There was no rush. The boy stood up, still holding his bracelet tightly, and thanked her again. She told him it was no problem at all, and that she was glad he was in a safe place. When she stepped outside the building, the cool air hit her face. She took a deep breath, feeling both tired and peaceful. The morning sun had risen higher now. Warming the street dot, she began walking back toward the diner, her steps steady and sure. She felt lighter not because the boy's troubles were gone, but because she had been able to offer him even a small bit of comfort. That afternoon, as she returned to work, she found herself smiling at customers a little more naturally. Her coworkers noticed something different in her, but didn't ask questions. She seemed calmer, more grounded, as if a weight she didn't realize she was carrying had shifted. During her break, she sat outside the diner, sipping water and staring at the passing cars. She thought about the boy again and felt a sense of quiet hope. He wasn't alone anymore. People were helping him. And she realized that sometimes just being there for someone, just listening, just noticing, could make a real difference. She still didn't know what the rest of the story would look like. She didn't know how long she would be a part of his journey or how things would unfold. But she knew that she had stepped into a moment that mattered, and she wasn't going to walk away from it lightly. Before returning inside, she closed her eyes for a brief moment and sent a silent wish into the air that the boy would find peace, comfort, and a life filled with safety. And somewhere deep inside, she sensed that this was not the end. Their paths had crossed for a reason, and the story still had more to reveal. The days that followed moved gently, almost like the soft turning of pages in a quiet book. The waitress kept going to work, and the diner stayed busy with its usual mix of early morning regulars, travelers passing through, and families stopping in for dinner. But even with all the noise and movement, she carried a calm sense of purpose inside her. She knew she would visit the boy again, and she knew he was slowly finding his way toward safety. A few days later, she received another message through the officer who had reached out before. The boy had asked if she could come see him again. The staff thought it would help him continue opening up, and they invited her to drop by whenever she had time. She felt a warm sense of responsibility, not forced, but chosen. She wanted to show up for him, just as she had the first time got, so on her next free afternoon, she made the quiet walk to the safe building once more. The streets looked brighter that day, as if the sunlight itself was trying to lift her spirits. When she reached the familiar door, she paused for a moment, placed her hand on the handle, and took a steady breath. Inside, the same friendly woman greeted her and led her to the small room where she had spoken with the boy before. She waited there, sitting on the soft chair, her hands resting lightly in her lap. The room had a peaceful feeling, colorful drawings hung on the walls, and a few toys rested neatly on the small shelves. Then the door opened, and the boy walked in slowly. He held the bracelet again, almost as if it were a shield and a comfort at the same time. When he saw her, he gave a quiet smile, the kind that didn't stretch wide, but could be felt in the way his shoulders dropped a little, as if he could breathe easier. "You came back," he said softly. She nodded. "Of course I did." He sat down across from her, more relaxed this time. His hands didn't fidget as much. His gaze wasn't filled with the fear she had first seen. Instead, there was trust, fragile but real. They talked again, this time a little more. He told her about a drawing he had made earlier that morning. It was a picture of a small house with a big tree next to it. He explained that he liked drawing places that felt safe, even if he had never been there. She listened closely, nodding gently. She didn't ask questions that would pull him into painful memories. She followed his lead, letting him decide how much to share. After a while, he asked her something that made her pause. "Do you think people can get better, even after something bad?" She looked at him with soft eyes, thinking carefully about how to answer. She didn't want to promise something she couldn't control, but she wanted to give him hope. "I think people can heal," she said quietly. "Maybe it takes time, and maybe they need help from people who care. But yes, I think people can get better." He nodded, holding the bracelet between his fingers. "I want to feel that." She leaned forward, just a little. "You're already taking steps. And you're not alone." The room felt warmer then, not because of the temperature, but because of the gentle connection building between them. He didn't need her to be a hero. He just needed someone to remind him that kind people existed, that the world wasn't entirely frightening. They spent almost an hour together before the staff member came in to gently signal that it was time to finish. The boy stood up slowly. He looked uncertain for a moment. Then he stepped closer and whispered, "Thank you for coming again." She smiled softly. "You're welcome. I'll come again if you want me to." He nodded, clutching the bracelet, and left the room. The waitress walked outside afterward, feeling a careful blend of peace and tenderness. The sky above her was a soft shade of blue, with thin clouds drifting lazily across it. She let out a long breath, feeling grateful that she could be part of something meaningful. As she walked back toward the diner, she found herself thinking about how small choices can change someone's path. She hadn't done anything extraordinary. She had simply noticed a quiet plea for help when no one else did. She had listened. She had cared. And sometimes that was enough to shift the entire course of a day or a life. When she returned to work the next day, one of her coworkers noticed the calm expression on her face and asked if everything was okay. She nodded and said she had just been thinking about things lately, how life can surprise you, how you never know when you might be the person someone needs. Her coworker smiled and didn't push for details. They both went back to serving customers, but the waitress carried that quiet warmth with her. A few days later, she visited the boy again, and then again. Each time, he talked a little more. He drew pictures for her, small sketches of trees, cars, and once even a bracelet surrounded by stars. She kept each drawing safe, sliding them carefully into a folder it honed out over time. She watched his shoulders relax, his voice grow steadier, and his eyes brighten. He wasn't healed completely. That kind of healing takes time, but he was slowly stepping out of the shadows. One afternoon, when she visited, the boy greeted her with an excited look. "I learned something," he said, sitting down quickly. "They're teaching me how to feel safe again." She smiled warmly. "That's wonderful. You deserve to feel safe." He nodded proudly. "They said I'm doing well." She gently patted his hand. "I'm glad. I'm really proud of you." They spent that visit talking about simple things, favorite foods, places they liked, things they wanted to learn. It felt peaceful, like a quiet victory. Then, near the end of the visit, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the bracelet. He looked at it for a moment, then held it out to her. "You should keep it," he said softly. She froze for a moment. "Are you sure? It means so much to you." He nodded. "It helped me when I was scared. But now I'm not as scared anymore. And I want you to have it. Because you helped me feel safe." Her eyes grew warm, and she felt an ache in her chest, not of sadness, but of deep emotion. She accepted the bracelet gently, like it was something fragile. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll take care of it." He smiled, a real smile this time, small but full of light. When she left that day, she walked slowly down the street, feeling the bracelet warm against her palm. She knew this wasn't just a simple object. It was a symbol of trust, of healing, of the quiet bond between two people who had crossed paths at exactly the right moment. Life at the diner continued as always. But she found herself looking at the world with softer eyes. She no longer moved through her days feeling invisible or unimportant. She realized that kindness had weight, that even the smallest moments could echo in someone else's life. She kept visiting the boy whenever she could. And as time passed, he grew more confident. The staff eventually told her that he might soon move into a better, more stable living situation, where he could continue healing in a supportive environment. When she heard that, she felt a bittersweet tug in her heart. She was happy for him, truly happy. But she knew that things were changing. On their last visit before he moved, the boy sat with her quietly. "I'm going somewhere new," he said softly. She nodded. "I heard. It's a good place. You'll be safe there." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Will you still think about me?" Her voice softened. "Of course I will. And you can think about me too, whenever you want." He smiled again. "I will." They sat together for the remainder of the visit, not needing many words. When it was time to leave, he stood up and gave her a small wave. "Thank you," he whispered. She nodded, her heart warm and full. "Take care of yourself. You're going to do great." And then he was gone. She walked out of the building with a quiet heart, holding the bracelet tightly. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the street. She stood there for a moment, letting the gentle wind brush against her face. She knew she might not see him again. But she also knew that their paths had touched in a way that mattered. She had been there for him when he needed someone the most. And he had reminded her that even ordinary people can make extraordinary differences. As she walked home, she felt something shift inside her, a stronger belief in the goodness of small actions, a deeper understanding of how powerful simple kindness can be. Sometimes, she realized, the quietest moments become the most meaningful, and this story, their story, would stay with her forever. She sat quietly in the back of the rehearsal hall, listening to the low echo of the piano as the last notes faded into the air. The hall was empty now, except for her and the quiet hum of the old lights overhead. She closed her eyes for a moment and let the stillness wrap around her. Everything that had happened over the past few days, replayed in her mind like a long, emotional film. The performance, the crowd's reaction, the unexpected turn her life had taken. Each memory filled her with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. She didn't think a simple moment at a piano could change anything in her life. She had only wanted to help calm the room, to bring a bit of peace to a noisy evening. She never imagined that her playing would reach the ears of people who could change her entire future. She remembered the first moment she sat at the grand piano in the crowded hall, her hands shaking slightly. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She only wanted to play from the heart, the way she always had in quiet moments when no one was watching. But strangers had watched. They had listened. And somehow, something in her music had touched them. The thought still made her breath catch. She felt both overwhelmed and humbled by everything that had followed. A soft knock pulled her from her thoughts. She looked up,